All right, everyone hear me? Thanks for coming. I'd like this to be quite interactive if possible and have everyone interrupt and ask questions because I haven't really prepared very well. I figured it wasn't going to be a big deal because I'm really just kind of talking about what I do for a living. So that shouldn't be too hard, but the structure and all those kind of things, we'll see how we go. So firstly, a bit about me. As discussed, I run an IT services business. I'm kind of like the Australian NETWAYS a little bit. You know, we've got a bunch of staff that work for us. And so I'm here to give away all our secrets and make them quite annoyed, which is why they put me at the end of the day. So here we are. That includes, we have our own hosting environment. So we host stuff for customers, racks in data centers, and we also provide outsourced services to other customers that have their own infrastructure. And so we get both a kind of direct customer relationship as well as sort of consulting, as well as building monitoring systems for other customers and all the sort of things in between. So we deal with embedded systems through to large storage systems and anything in between. So the real next question is, who are you guys? So who here sort of works in a kind of consulting role or works in a consulting role? Julian? You guys? I'm not sure what you're all doing here then. Really? Like, did you read the topic? You got the wrong talk? Because the maps module's really cool. I wanted to go to that one.
We all want to hear how you did.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll see how we go. So, as for the rest of you, I'm actually really genuinely trying to give something back to the community. I have done reasonably well out of the work that I've done through a lot of hard work and effort. I'm happy with my level of success. We're happy with the life that I've managed to make for myself through consulting on open source software, and very grateful to the shoulders of the giants that I've been able to stand on, that have made software that has enabled me to get a job done that I enjoy and is productive. So hopefully, that's something you guys want too, and I'm genuinely going to hopefully give you a hand getting there. So, what does monitoring mean to various people? There's the old prison guard not watching and the obligatory Dilbert cartoon kind of sums it up for a lot of times. You get a boss that says, well, we need some monitoring. So they go out and kind of Google, I want some monitoring, or they hit up their local kind of reseller of whatever IT they use, and they buy the latest and shiniest kind of GUI that does all singing, all dancing kind of things, and then no one ever pays attention to it. They buy something that's cloud enabled and they can deploy on all their whole things, and then it's just a big noisy mess. So the other thing is, monitoring itself means a bunch of different things to different people. You guys probably don't really read the Australian news, but just today or yesterday, a iron ore train crashed in Western Australia, and somehow the driver got out. It's a train that's driven by a single driver. It's kilometres long, the train. Somehow the driver got out to check on something. The train got away from him, and it got 93 kilometres down the track before they figured out how to get it off the track. And now the entire train, all, hundreds of sort of huge steel containers full of iron ore, is now in pieces. And BHP is quite upset, and it'll affect production schedules and all those kind of things. Bottom line is, there's a team of people that monitor that train, that run over fibre optic cables from thousands of kilometres away, and there's a guy whose job it is. And as you'll see, monitoring means lots of different things to different people. And I'll also hopefully come to the point where we can engender in our customers a culture, there's one down, of every outage is a failure of monitoring. And I want to get to that point. So, what is the problem and why are there failures? And when you walk into a customer and say, hey, I think we can do monitoring better, there aren't any shortage of tools that tick all the boxes. There are plenty of things out there that will do the job. A couple of really great options, a couple of trends in how we do things differently. As Mick pointed out, it all kind of looks the same though after a while. At the end of the day, the real problem though is a combination of tools, processes and people. And then you as a consultant is hopefully meant to join all those things together into an actual cohesive solution. And you can tell the majority is really not the tools. Most of the work is involved in actually figuring out what the problems are, what we care about, how we're going to get people to pay attention to those problems, and then make sure that the train doesn't get derailed off the track or we lose a whole bunch of people's data or bad things happen. So there are other problems I'll work through as well. The feedback loop of getting things worked out and integrating to project timelines and all those kind of things. The other thing is getting people's attention. So the amount of, your typical alert might go off and people eventually ignore it, or they figure out a way of turning things off. I've had a number of customers where they had major outages because the guy that was on call turned his phone off, and forgot to turn it back on, and or had another customer recently where they had a dashboard that was alerting and they had 27 hours worth of outage with no, with no kind of alert because the alert itself wasn't getting in their faces. And the NOC team that was staffed 24/7 just failed to, see that red dot, or I have no idea what they were doing, but or not doing. But ultimately, you need to be able to get people's attention. And I mean, that's sort of the key. It seems like a fundamental fact, but when you're building a monitoring system, getting people's attention about things that we care about is really the crux of it. And if your job is to help a company do that, then you need to have in your head as you walk into a customer these kind of ideas. What am I here to do? I'm here to help these people care about their own stuff. And that sounds like a kind of simplistic way of putting it, but it's very easy for your average IT guy, and we've all seen them. They turn up every day and they sit at their computer and they reply to some emails and they sit in a bunch of meetings, and then that's like one of those crappy conference calls where people are leaving, and then they go home at the end of the day, and it's very easy to kind of get pretty apathetic about how things work. Very common in large organizations. Who here knows some people who are apathetic about their job? No one? Come on. Come on. So anyway, bottom line is getting people's attention so they actually care is actually not, it's not just about getting an alert. It's actually about sitting alongside people and saying, you know what, if we improve this situation, if we actually can say, well, that's red for a reason, and if we made it green, then this other guy's not going to get annoyed at you and your life will be much happier, that can make a big difference. People can actually be happy to come to work, I suppose, but we'll see how we go. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that monitoring, and as a consultant, it's all about service delivery. I feel like we forget very easily in IT and infrastructure and applications and all the hipster cool things we're doing these days, containers and DevOps, that really most of what we do is servants of industry. We exist so that other businesses can actually make money. We exist to provide the platform for people to sell iron ore or make TV work or build laptops or whatever it might be. So, and it's very easy to forget that. You have an empire, it's really cool, you've got all the latest flashy things, you go to cool conferences and meet crazy people, and really our job is to make sure other people's jobs and their businesses work properly. And so the monitoring system has to ultimately serve that purpose. It has to deliver to the business infrastructure that's reliable, and our job is to serve those businesses. So, how do we get started? Sorry about the bad jokes. So, first thing I would do is figure out what people care about. Thanks, Mick. He's much better at Google image search than I am. And that's a hard thing. I've had plenty of people come to me and say, Dave, we've got this thing over here and it needs some monitoring, and I hear you're doing some monitoring stuff. I'm like, yeah, okay. And they're like, well, here you go. And I'm like, well, what is that and how does it work? And anyone used EMC Isilon before? Anyone? Large storage array, costs millions of dollars, that kind of stuff. I'd never seen it before. Now I'm an expert. I'm genuinely actually an expert. And I suppose at the end of the day, the other thing I'd point out about monitoring, just from a consulting point of view, is that it's pretty much a gateway drug. If you have some IT services skills and you know how Linux works, you know how Windows works, or networking, or however it might work, then going to customers and saying, I can provide monitoring for you, is a great way of figuring out what their problems are, shining a light on those problems, and then helping you fix them. You can generate a lot of billable hours from being able to say, well, really, this cluster is broken, or, look at this, I found a whole bunch of dead disks, and hopefully you resell disks, that kind of stuff. So those are things. Next things to do is drill down, as I said. What else have I got here? Oh, the other thing I would say is about how to get started is I'm not a big fan of auto-discovery systems. There's plenty of tools out there, commercial tools, that they're like, great, you can just plonk it down and it just figures everything out and it'll draw a big map for you, and what do you know, you've got alerts on power supplies that you don't care about and fan speed you don't care about, and there's thousands of alarms, and it ends up being a totally unmanageable mess. So I always start with my customers with a completely blank slate, and I say, right, let's start with the top 10 things that you care about. Those things are not disk space, they're systems, They're like, here is and different businesses will divide systems into different things depending on how their teams are structured. Here is a system. This is the most important system to our business. Let's make sure that works. If it was Domino's, it'd be the pizza oven. It's really important that thing is working. We need to write a dashboard that says the pizza oven is working. And until we've done that and got that right, we don't move on to the next thing. We don't generate a whole lot more noise. We have a completely blank slate and monitor the crap out of that pizza oven until it's perfect and keep going. And because collectively, as an organization, you need to get good at getting good. I know that sounds weird, but when you start with something and you polish it nicely, other people come along, and when the alerts go from being, red, green, yellow, all sorts of other colors, to, oh, there's a dashboard there, it says that it's green, and I haven't got any alerts. And you know what that really means? It means that something is checking that system, and it is actually working. You don't have to worry anymore. You actually have a machine doing a bunch of work for you. It automates the idea of service delivery, and building the faith that you have in, that staff have in your monitoring system is super important. So having the ability to be able to say, when it says it's green, it really is green. It means it actually has been checked. It's not and this is why I hate passive checks, by the way. It doesn't, it knows that it's really green, and you want to make sure that there's a right side failure. I was talking earlier about trains. We have a customer that does a bunch of trains, and they're always talking about right side failure when they build systems, which means when the system fails, no one gets hurt. The point is the train goes straight off the tracks or something like that. Train disasters aside, but yeah. So building faith in the system is really important, and starting clean is I feel, the best way to do that. Now, where is my mouse gone? Here we are. So the other thing that I see a lot is monitoring as two various types. You've got time series data and state change data. Now, I'm a big fan of state change for the reason that I talked about before. I know Julian will disagree, but he tends to shoehorn different things in. My point is, to build faith in a system that delivers service to the business, they need to have a positive, very simple binary way of measuring what's going on. You've got a traffic light, it says it's okay, everyone has faith that it's okay, and they can relax and get on with actually building important systems instead of freaking out about things. What I don't like about an interface like this is that for the purpose of service delivery, it just confuses people. There's a bunch of graphs, and they don't really know if those graphs are exactly what we want. So you end up to have to bolt on a state change check to a time series data. Time series data is super important for analysis, super important to figure out what happened, to dig in things and go, well, at this time there was a spike here and a spike there, therefore we've got this problem. Very important. Don't not collect time series data. But when you're trying to deliver service, you're going to end up with at some point, a binary check that figures out what's going on. All right, what else have we got? Oh, I've got a note here that says use whiteboard, but I don't have a whiteboard, so that's a shame. So the next thing I would do is figure out the life cycle of a monitored event. So is everyone familiar with these kind of states, roughly. Hopefully I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. The reason why I had a note here to say use a whiteboard is because it's actually a really important way of getting people into a room and drawing a diagram. And I really believe in drawing as I talk. My drawings are terrible, much worse than the last guy's drawings, if you're in that previous talk. But it doesn't matter because people understand what's going on when you draw something. And I think having a workflow that lays things out, and in this case, I would use a diagram like this to say, it's okay, and a service check is okay once every 5 minutes, and then actually figure out what the times are. And this might be 1 minute, and then we start to move on to obsession. Obsession is the decreasing frequency of checks between these states, and then so you draw a timeline out and go, right, that's 30 seconds. Now we're at 4 minutes, and then at 5 minutes we're going to notify, and then at 10 minutes we're going to escalate, and if we don't acknowledge, we're going to escalate again, and hopefully we're going to move on to resolution. So these are this understanding of what happens when something goes wrong needs to be really clear, and I like to sort of draw it up and print it out and stick it on the wall so people understand what the expectation is about. If I get an alert, how long has it actually been down for? How does it actually work? What's the expectation there? What kind of mess have I got myself into? All right, so what else we got? Check things people actually care about. I'm a big believer in this. What's the point of a monitoring tool if no one pays attention to it? That's a good question. But the other problem with this is defining what's really important to a business is often quite difficult. That could be buried in an annual report, and it's the revenue they make from some real estate deal, and you can't monitor that stuff very easily. So, often what happens is I will wander around the building and ask people whose job it is to have the monitors open or to take the tickets from the customers or however it might be and say, what's important to you for your business or what's important for you to get your job done, and try and figure out how to monitor that. My business, we have a bunch of SLAs. Anyone else have SLAs that they work towards? Service level agreements, you get paid if you don't, or don't get paid if you don't respond in time is really what it comes down to. So one of the things we do is we monitor our ticketing system to make sure that we're responding to customers in time. And the on-call person's job, part of that, is to make sure everyone else is meeting the SLAs. So, we have other monitoring systems that create tickets, and then another monitoring system that monitors that ticketing queue to make sure that that's getting done. And because my business is in the business of service delivery, that's important to us, and it really enforces an actual, genuinely, core business proposition we offer to our customers. And I can say to them, here we go, we've got back to you within this period of time. That will be totally different for different people. There'll be different things about business processes and what the key indicators are and how that all works for different people. I've got a customer where they receive a data feed for television station, and the data goes on air, and people bet on this data. It's really important. Horse racing odds and things like that. And that everything is triple redundant. So data feeds come into 3 different servers, and we have a custom plugin we wrote that compares the data of those 3 different services. They have to be accurate within 1 minute. It's like a streaming kind of check. And before we wrote that check, everyone was doing a whole series of manual things. They're logging into databases and literally running manual SQL queries like multiple times a day to check to see what was happening and what was actually in the database and all those things. And then after writing that check and letting it settle for a while and getting people used to the fact that it actually works properly and it says that it's okay, a whole bunch of, load was lifted off the system sort of mentally, so people kind of were able to move on and start building something else that wasn't as crap. But, you actually have to, create a robust business process and check that exact business process for people to have that kind of sense of relief, that they're not constantly fighting fires. All right. So, how about the right tools? I added this right at the last minute, probably a bit too late. So, I have a kind of a passion for open source as an open source monitoring conference. Choosing what the right tools are is something that probably comes with a fair bit of experience, but I'd like to kind of walk through a couple of these bullet points and explain a bit in detail. What is a healthy open source project? Well, a healthy project is one that is actually open source all the way through, and I'm a big believer in that because it needs to be malleable, which is the last point there. That being, when you are building a monitoring system, you're encoding what's important to a business in that system. And that system will be a series of components. It will be something that checks things, something that maybe alerts them or graphs them, and the plugins that make it all complicated and valid. But you need to have a tool that's flexible enough that you can really just change parts of it, adapt it, contribute to it, make a big difference. So, and proprietary tools just simply don't do it. I haven't come across a single proprietary tool that has anywhere near the level of flexibility required to do that, and to really express what's important to a business. They all fall down in some way, it's sad to say. So you do that through some APIs. The other thing that's really important is that it can be distributed. Your modern environment, with firewalls and different branches and all those kind of things, distributed monitoring is very important. And I wouldn't pick a tool without it. Scalable and integrating with things, two important things. Scale is one of those things that means many different things for different people. You can have a cluster of servers and tens of thousands of checks, or your scale can be one of my customers. Their idea of scale is really about the time it takes to get between the things they're monitoring, because it costs a lot of money to drive 1,000 kilometers to fix something. So they need to have better monitoring of that particular place so they don't have to drive there so often, because that costs a lot of money. So when you think about it, that's a scaling issue in the sense that it's all about sort of the cost of how it works and being able to have a very lightweight but detailed view of understanding what's going on across that kind of tyranny of distance is really important. Integrating with various things is important. When I'm evaluating a tool, you can go to the web page and have a look at it and go, well, okay, so these guys are, they tick all these boxes, integrate with these various things. I was a bit sad to hear about my one of my customers that's moving to ServiceNow. Got any ServiceNow users here? We're talking about that. So before, when we were talking about yesterday, and I don't know if it's correct or not, but the consultant was like, I was like, oh, so what we want to do is create tickets in the ticketing system and then use the API to make sure that if the ticket status changes, we comment on the ticket again. We don't want to make lots of tickets or just send emails. I want to actually interact with that particular event the way it needs to be. And the guy was like, oh, that's easily another 20 grand, mate, and probably going to be 3 weeks and it's just not going to happen. And I was just like, really? Like, come on, how hard is it? Maybe I'm entirely wrong with that, who knows? Maybe they've got a bad consultant. Point being is, a proprietary tool in ticketing is just as bad as a proprietary tool in your monitoring system, because being able to join them together in a way that makes sense for your particular customer is like crucial. So, the other thing I don't hesitate to write is custom plugins. We've written hundreds of plugins, many of them, not open source because customers pay us to write them. Who here has written a custom plugin for their monitoring system? Yep, lots of people. Excellent. Sorry to keep asking questions, raise your hand. I know it's the end of the day, but just hang in there. It's exercise. And I think it's important because every environment is going to be slightly different, and yes, you can unify how these checks work, but to some extent, at least in the sort of real world that I live in, where our customers do real world things, and all your people who work in manufacturing are definitely in that category, and that you hipsters with your Kubernetes clusters aren't. Sorry to say. We monitor real things, pool filters and oxygen monitors and baby things and all sorts of other stuff. Point being is that requires the ability to be able to write something custom. SNMP is a massive letdown. I've come across some total SNMP disasters. My record is 6 months to get a MIB out of a company, 6 months and a CEO signature from both companies with a non-disclosure agreement. Why? It's ridiculous. Point being is, ended up just writing something that scraped the web interface and was much easier, works reliably. SNMP, unfortunately, was a total joke in that regard. So, we're talking about specialist equipment here, so it's to be expected. So I would suggest that custom plugins are a way that you as a consultant can add value to your customer. you should treat them like you would treat software. That would be, the correct software life cycle. Have a staging area, you can test them, make sure they're committed to revision control, they're intellectual property, so they probably belong to the customer or not, and where possible, contribute back to other open source projects that have plugins. It's important that we all continue to work together. So, but they are definitely a way you can add value as a consultant. What that means, though, I suppose, is you need to know how to write software. I don't claim to write software. I write a lot of bash scripts, and that's a very loose definition of software. But having people that can write code for you, glue things together, take existing tools, and build plugins for customers, I think is really important. All right, and then hopefully we can work towards monitoring Nirvana. I have a vision for our customers where they are able to create a device in a database and it automatically gets monitored, it automatically gets built, it automatically gets backed up, and then when they delete it, it goes away again. Now, that's not really a reality. Maybe the hipsters with the Kubernetes stuff, that is a reality, and hey, that's maybe what they're after. But it is achievable with open source software. It is achievable with not too much effort to bolt even onto existing structures. The tools that we use for that, we've started to use NetBox, and I want to give you a demo of that. Ansible, APIs for Ichinga and various other things. And I think as consultants, when we talk to people, taking them on the journey where they go from sort of a blank slate with no automation or monitoring all the way through to being fully automated is something that we need to figure out where they're at and work towards that. I've wandered into people's places and said, we can do all this great stuff and we want to write some playbooks and make all this happen, and they sort of just scratch their head and look at you a bit blankly and just don't kind of get it. So you need to start at the beginning with people, have the right tools, make them feel that they're welcome, and come up with a plan that makes sense for where their staff are at and where their business is at and all those kind of things. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and you can't come in there and just kick heads. You actually have to gently figure out where they're up to, suggest, right, how about we do this, how about we do this, and you'll get to the point where the vision can be achieved. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you NetBox is I'm sort of, grew to like it recently, sort of a bit of a phase I'm going through. Who knows? It doesn't suck just yet. Whoops. And so I actually stuck it on a Docker container on my machine. And NetBox is a open source IP address management / asset management system by DigitalOcean, the hosting company. It runs Django and Postgres and is pretty cool. So it has organizations, sites, tenants, and racks. I just chucked in a rack here, and the zoom kind of sucks on this. We can scroll down and see a rack. So it has a view of a rack, and a rack has entities, and machines have interfaces, and interfaces have IP addresses. If I pick this VMware server, it's a blade in a blade chassis, and it's got IP addresses and it's connected to this. Anyone else use NetBox? Do you like it? Yeah, excellent. The reason why I think it's good is because it basically very succinctly expresses what a modern data center looks like. It understands VRFs and VLANs and NAT and virtualization and all those kind of things. And it does so in a very simple kind of, this is just what I do kind of way. So this comes back to choosing tools that you believe in. And the reason why this appeals to me is because it does just the job that I need it to do, and it has a good API that can be built into other things. So there's an Ansible module in the latest version of Ansible that will query NetBox for objects, via the API, and you can go, right, I want to run a playbook against all the machines in this rack, or all the Linux boxes in this data center, those kind of things. You can tag, devices with operating systems and, various custom metrics and all those kind of things. So these are the devices I added. A blade chassis has bays. You can have parents and children. And then coming on to the monitoring part of it, if I pick, I think this particular guy, you can add a service to a machine and then, set up some basic level of monitoring on that via the API, because there is a Chinga Director import module, or port 76, that'll work. So you can actually import services and have some basic level of tracking. Now, this isn't going to be a total solution. Obviously, you need a lot more information than that. You can use tags, manage secrets, and a bunch of other things. But for the price, which is $0, NetBox is a fantastic solution and really beats a lot of proprietary things out of there. So we've replaced other proprietary IP address management systems with this and been very happy with the results. And I go back to why that's important. It's not a monitoring tool, but it's the source of truth that is easy to manage, easy to integrate with other things, and then should flow into monitoring, configuration management. You need that source of truth. Many people have, a spreadsheet or some old dude in the basement that knows where things go or how that all works. But this is a structured way of doing it. It's a joy to use, a joy to edit the data. And I really don't say that about a lot of tools. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, where are we up to? Cool. So the other thing that people want to move on to is something a little bit more advanced, which is the idea of event commands. I've lost my speaker notes somehow. Where are we? Piece of junk. Notes. Thank you. This is the problem with live demos. And full screen. I was talking to someone earlier about, she was talking to me about event commands, and she wants to be able to restart a web server when it's down or something like that. And I explained how it all works, and this goes back to your state change diagram where you're going through hard and soft states, and then, well, what if we get the monitoring system to actually fix the problem for us, and wouldn't that be great? And I said, great, here's how it works. However, you must keep in mind that you're really just papering over the cracks. If you've got a situation where you have to write a script to keep something running, you've really got another problem that you actually need to fix. You shouldn't have a system that just crashes all the time and, oh great, we just let the monitoring system restart it and away we go. Fix the actual problem. Now, some things are Java, but, aside from that was a Java joke. There are underlying problems that adding, I suppose the lesson to be learned as a consultant is that adding advanced features like event commands often papers over the cracks of underlying problems. All right, so what else was there? Metrics. I'd like to encourage people to make sure that when they're looking at metrics, that they figure out what's meaningful for the organization. And that's going to be different for everyone. And then gathering them, and as discussed in other talks, averages of averages are totally meaningless. So you get a pretty graph and it looks great and it's nice and smooth, but really is not particularly useful for actual analysis. So I would caution people about using metrics and making sure that they understand what metrics are actually used for, or which ones are actually useful for a business. The second thing I would do is make sure that as a value add we can enrich our alerts. One of the ways we're doing that with NetBox is, when you get an alert about an actual thing, very easily be able to call back to the NetBox API with the custom variable and attach to the alert the actual rack that the device is in. I suppose in a cloud-native world that's not relevant, but these are the kind of real things that we actually need to deal with. Where is it physically? How does it work? Enriching your alerts with something that people can actually use is a way of creating that faith in the system. That means, oh, I got an alert that I was told to do something. I know what to do now. There's documentation in the wiki. There's a link to how it all works. All those kind of things. The next thing I'd like you to consider is when anytime an organization engages in a new project and they're trying to build a new thing, that monitoring itself is part of that project. It comes back to service delivery. All too often, unfortunately, we build new projects, we invest in infrastructure, and don't consider how we're actually going to support it. And as a consultant, at the highest levels, we sort of have to sit down with people that run project management teams and say, look, you need to actually take, when a project manager is building something, they need to have a plan for how this thing's going to get supported, how it's going to be monitored and managed. And unfortunately, it often comes sort of, it's like the new guy turns up to work and he doesn't have a laptop because no one told him, that the IT guy, that someone was going to turn up to work. And they're like, oh, look, we've got a whole new rack worth of gear here, and how do we actually monitor it, and what does it even do, and who cares? And the vendor's like, oh, no, it's fine, it never breaks, never at all. And you're like, sure, mate. So, yeah, it has to be integrated with your project plan. Some gotchas, things to look out for. Lazy stuff. Firewalls, I put firewalls in here because I've seen many projects come unstuck because they just can't actually do the stuff they need to do. A distributed monitoring system is really important and very helpful for pretty much getting around firewalls. You can have checks executed over there and come back to here, and that's really useful because you only have to apply for a firewall rule change once instead of many times. And the other thing I'd point out is that monitoring systems become a security point of weakness. When a system has access to everything else in the building, it becomes a target for, hostile people. So you're going to have a firewall there, and you're going to have to figure out a way of managing that, and it really can slow the project right down. I've got customers where, you have to apply and wait a week for a firewall change, and it goes through a board, and they approve it, and so it's a 7-day turnaround time. You get the port wrong, another 7 days, and you can spend months just getting the firewall rules right before you can even monitor that thing that you've been asked to monitor. So I wouldn't underestimate that. It's an important part of the deal. So the other 4 things are really things you're going to come up against all the time. You have people that say, oh, I've got this monitoring system and it's all fallen apart at the seams, but, you can't touch it. And they'll do crazy political things to try and make sure you don't get to make a difference. Plenty of other proprietary monitoring systems. My approach with other monitoring systems, and, we have customers that will buy a system that comes with monitoring. They spend $1 million on a project and it comes with a solution to let people monitor, and it's a Windows box with a custom GUI on it, or a web interface, or a SNMP MIB that you apply for, however it might be. And so my approach is to actually make sure that those systems can integrate with a single master, because what you don't want to have is a workflow where it's different for all the different teams. You want to get to a point where you can consistently deliver service to the business, and to do that you need to have a amalgamation of different systems into the one thing. And unfortunately, we all have the issue of lazy and ignorant staff. Probably doesn't need a lot of explanation. So I've got a few more tips just to wrap up, last 5 minutes. The other thing I'd suggest about integrating design and sustainability for our projects, it seems like an odd word to use, but the systems that I think have the most amount of, maybe I'll put it another way. It's common in a business where the general population, the people that we serve that are getting the work done in a business, come to get annoyed about a piece of software. Everyone knows a story about this where, they're like, oh, it's broken again, this kind of thing's broken. And it's a failure of an IT department to, I think, build better monitoring around that to stay ahead of those problems so the actual end users don't notice them. There's a thing about load average on Linux. At some point, a load average of 2 doesn't matter when you've got 128 CPUs. A load average of 129 matters, because that's when someone's waiting. No one's waiting up at that point. So when you're designing your monitoring, you need to scale it to what's reality, but also make sure that you stay ahead of your users. And that has to be part of the design of a system. And the sustainability you get out of that is that people come to trust you as service providers much more. The other thing I've noticed is that people in major incidents, who's had a really big outage that they had to sit through? Shit really hit the fan, get on a conference call for hours, 12 hours later you get off the phone, you're exhausted, yeah. I mean, it happens, and altogether too often, at the end of the call, when things are actually fixed, everyone just hangs the phone up and goes back to bed as quickly as they can. But really what should be happening is, hey, how do we monitor this better so it doesn't happen again? Because as I said, major outages are failures of monitoring themselves. And then the other thing was ticketing. I already mentioned that. So I think that's about it in terms of value. I really am looking forward to some questions. So thanks for listening.
Thank you. We still have some minutes for questions. Yeah, Michael?
Oh, you spoke about value for business and key value indicator and things like that. Have you ever taken monitoring to like an executive level to actually monitor the business key value indicators and things like that? Or is it just the underlying IT infrastructure?
No, we have. We have a customer that provides business intelligence to people. And so much like what Julian's doing with his Prometheus stuff at his current customer, they do reporting across the whole business about how that works. And so our monitoring system delivers the checks to make sure they're meeting those thresholds, you know. So they consume a whole bunch of data and do a whole bunch of processing on it, but they still have checks to make sure, A, that those processes are working, and B, that they're actually meeting the values that they have. And then that, you know, they can get alerts from that. So, I mean, that's just one example, but there are, you know, definitely have done that. It takes some time, and it takes a really simple dashboard. We use NAGVIZ with big boxes, you know, nothing complicated, no text at all. You just have, here's a traffic light that says how it's if it's working or not. And it has to be really simple. Sorry, managers, but it really does. Any other questions?
Still questions?
You said that every outage is a failure of monitoring. But how can monitoring prevent bugs or human errors?
That's a good question. It really probably depends on how you have your pipelines worked out. I think in terms of software bugs, the only other thing I'd say about that is building a robust system so that you can survive bugs and lightning strikes and, you know, all those kind of things is the other feedback loop that happens. So it's a failure of monitoring to highlight the single points of failure, might be the other way of putting that, where you say, well, we are monitoring this thing, but it just failed and there was nothing, it was super critical, there was only one of them, and now it's gone, you know? And you really just kind of, if it's that important, you shouldn't be in that situation. That's a design choice that you've made. So, I mean, it probably was a little bit of an exaggeration, but because, you know, obviously shit happens. But, you know, when things are that important, I would suggest that you shouldn't be relying on someone to fix them. Machines are good at making sure that there's two of things and that you can take over from them and all that sort of stuff. And as you build a monitoring system, you'll discover single points of failure and be able to feed that back to your customer and say, hey, look, you know, would you like to buy another one of those? Or, hey, I can spend 2 weeks building you a second one, or, you know, kind of monitor. I can build tests into your software environment so you have less bugs and you don't release shitty code into production. You know, those kind of things. So as I said, it's actually a way of generating billable hours for a consultant that understands these things. You need to have a team of people that can help you with that, but it's an opportunity, not a crisis.
Questions?
Anyone else? Another question?
Yeah.
It's not a question, but the question about the bugs. What's really important is that you also monitor from the development and to every environment, and that you actually get traffic on those environments. Like, if we are partners that are using your infrastructure, then make sure they also use the test environment and that you also monitor it. And it's like that we catch a lot of bugs just by looking at how the testing environment is doing before we put stuff in production.
That's a really good point. So basically turn your monitoring on staging because it's just as important as production. The alerting pattern can be different, and you should by all means have, you know, a separate workflow for alerts that, you know, these are the super critical things. When someone doesn't deal with this alert, that manager is getting out of bed. Whereas these are the ones where we can just see what's going on, and if we're paying attention, we make a change, we look at that, how it works. The monitoring system defines what's healthy, and we make sure that it's healthy in staging before we roll it out. So prevention is better than cure, I suppose, is the summary of that one.
I couldn't agree more with your thing about self-healing and event commands or event handlers, because I think it's the best way to get a read-only system to kill your main clusters. It's you don't even think about the monitoring system being able of that, and you're maybe lazy with your configuration, and then it's the fan. What I wanted to ask is, you just said that your customers pay you for building custom plugins, so you you aren't able to open source them. But isn't that a way to get other companies to contribute to the community? I personally know some enterprises don't allow you to open source it, but couldn't that be a way of getting others to get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's a matter of negotiation. You know, you enter into an agreement with a customer and it's pages and pages long, and you have to, at the end of the day, sign it. They're a huge company and they're going to pay you a lot of money to help them. You have to kind of do what they say. And I think there's a bit of a grey area with some of these things. We're talking about not a lot of work. You're not building a whole thing that's going to be their core business, so you can negotiate that and contribute it back. And I encourage our customers to be, you know, good open source citizens. I don't have a great answer for you, though, in terms of, you know, yes, it's a good thing, but in terms of actually getting people to do it, it's often quite fraught with, you know, danger. I once, you know, the CIO of this multi-billion-dollar corporation came down and gave a presentation, and we're all sitting in the room, and she's like, "Oh, look how much open source we use. You know, we're an open source friendly company. We use all this stuff." And she had this huge presentation about how it was, and then someone from the back of the room piped up and said, "So how much do you contribute back to these organizations?" She was like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that." 0 was the answer. So yes, they download stuff off GitHub, but that doesn't make them an good open source citizen. You know, let's keep fighting the fight.
Okay, then Dave, there was this question: who is dealing with ServiceNow from you in the past?
Yes.
So I can tell you, you can say you're ServiceNow guy, that it's possible to integrate a valid alerting into ServiceNow in 5 days with creating tickets attached to a department administrator and the right system.
5 days. Still seems like a lot of effort, but okay.
I don't know how good is the ServiceNow guy. Okay. You know, so it depends on him. So the script you need to write,
no, that's
maybe
fair
needs
enough.
2 hours.
Yeah, it was possibly one of those empire building things. You know, people give you an answer that's not really the correct one because they're trying to get you to go away, but we'll see.
Okay, Dave,
All
then
right.
it's time to say thank you for being here.
No
Here's
problem.
a little present for you. So, thanks.
Thanks.